This sequence is called Losing Nemo. It was developed very early on. We thought we had to dramatize Dory's short-term memory loss being a problem. So we devised this idea of Dory feeling confident enough that she could, by herself, chaperone Nemo to see a stingray migration. This was the genesis of the stingray migration, which stayed in the picture. But we ultimately learned that this was a bit of a distraction. We basically made a problem for Dory that was small. We realized that we didn't need it. What was a bigger thing to say was that Dory had a point of view about herself that was flawed from the beginning, since she was little. And we wanted that just to be amplified in Act 1, not become a new problem. Sometimes you stay stupid for much longer than you want to on a film. And in this case, it was almost for 4 years. This sequence is completely finished. It's lit, it's animated, it's scored. That rarely happens. We usually catch these things early. But we got that far along and realized that we had too many steps in Dory's equation to remember her parents. I thought she needed to have a single memory, have a night of disturbed sleep. Nemo would overhear her, and then the next morning he would say whatever she said in her sleep, and then she'd have a flood of memories. My editor, Axel Geddes, realized that it was redundant. You don't need that middle step. She can just have that first traumatic experience of being sucked into the rays, and in that moment, mumble the phrase, "Would you live more away in California?" And it was like, well, why didn't we see this? So that was this was a really tough sequence to cut because so many people, the entire crew and an entire orchestra, worked on this. You can still see the guilt on my face from having to talk about this. The fun fact is it even made it into the first teaser trailer. That's how late it was in the film. This is another early scene of us attempting to figure out how to make Dory cross the ocean. We thought, well, she's a fish. Maybe she has migratory instincts like a bird, and that maybe she could go into some sort of trance-like state and her fins would lead her home. And that was a cool idea. It made a lot of sense, but it took a lot of screen time, and it also robbed her of any choice. It robbed her character of choosing and deciding how she wanted to do things, and that's the only way you really can track a character's change and growth. So it ended up actually being something that was a hindrance, so we took it out. When we do these things, there's always something good that comes out of them, and one of the benefits was we came up with the big-mouth clam, who was a nosy neighbor of Marlin's, and we thought he was so funny that we put him in the Marine Life Institute later in the film. Happy to see me! I'm happy to see you! Scene's called Meeting Hank, and this is the original way that Dory met Hank. What happened is that Dory would travel through the pipes of the Marine Life Institute, trying to remember exactly where her parents were, and she would get lost, of course, because of her short-term memory loss. And one of the characters she bumps into is Hank in his exhibit. Oh, and you'll notice that Hank, in this version, has a bit of a drinking problem with hot sauce. This scene is called The Pig. One of the fun facts we learned when we were researching at the Monterey Bay Aquarium is that they have these big foam kind of bullets that they call the pig, that they put into a pipe to clean the pipes. The pipes can get full of all the sea life, of mollusks and barnacles and stuff, and this thing just sort of pushes all that junk out. And we thought it would be fun for Dory to have to encounter this, like almost like a little bit of a horror movie. It'll start with Dory just seeing her parents, and then they're snatched out of the exhibit that she's in, the open ocean exhibit, and so she has to try to get to the other exhibit using the pipes like a highway system. It got cut because the whole plot line changed, and she ended up not meeting her parents in the middle of the film anymore, and that's why it This scene is called Dory Dumped. It's the first version of Dory getting separated at the end of Act 2 from all her loved ones. And this is one of the versions where her parents also had short-term memory loss, and that became such a chore. It was never as funny or as interesting as we thought it could be. I wouldn't be surprised if you get annoyed just by watching this sequence with 3 characters all forgetting. I've been involved one way or another with all 17 of our Pixar movies that we've made so far. And one of the things I've definitely learned from that is that we will be changing the beginning of our films again and again and again throughout the course of making the movie. It's because the movie's still a moving target, the joke's still being told, and as the punchline evolves, you want to keep going back to the front and changing the setup. So the last thing we put into production is usually the beginning of the film. And so that's why you're going to see a series of prologues for Finding Dory that represent about 2 years. And you're going to see sort of the evolution of our prologue. So this first version, we tried just dropping you into a scene from Finding Nemo. Now, this prologue is the next attempt we tried, which was being with Dory as a little fish, but being very abstract, already playing with her and just stumbling into getting lost. And all the other details we kind of kept vague, as if it's a memory that you would have yourself as a child, and that ended up being the problem of why we didn't do it. Now, this third prologue was us now trying to actually meet the parents, but we had the mistake at this time that everybody should have short-term memory loss, that all blue tangs had short-term memory loss. And this final version was the one that really got us into a foothold of what you finally see in the finished film. But we just started to tell you too much. We told you exactly how she got lost too early up front in the film. This next series of scenes involves the tank gang. This idea was here from the beginning, and it stayed in the picture for about 2.5 years. I loved the idea of Marlin and Nemo getting separated from Dory, and that Dory would have to figure out how to handle things on her own. Bye. That idea stayed, but how I decided to do that was they got separated in the shipping lanes where they meet the squid now in the movie. And she would end up at MLI. Marlin and Nemo would bump into the tank gang who had escaped their baggies, and were now this crack Mission Impossible fish gang. And the reason it got cut was because it ultimately became more about Marlin and didn't support Dory's story. All good things lead to having the wherewithal to cut something out of the picture, and there should be no regrets, but I must admit I have a tinge of regret losing this whole subplot.